All right, welcome to today's Lunch and Learn webinar, Keeping the Physical and Virtual Worlds in Sync, brought to you by ArcherPoint and Dynamic Manufacturing Solutions. It's a constant struggle for many organizations to keep their physical operations in sync with the data in Microsoft Dynamics NAV, often relying on paper-based systems for warehouse management and manufacturing simply because they are unaware of other options. They continue to struggle. But there is a surprisingly simple solution: barcoding. Today's Lunch and Learn will provide an overview of barcoding and how easy it can be to get a barcoding strategy implemented. Our presenter today is Mark Hamblin, President of Dynamic Manufacturing Solutions, a software development and consulting firm specializing in add-ons for Dynamics NAV. Mark spent many years working in manufacturing and distribution before leveraging that experience to create software for those industries. As part of his software development career, Mark also taught computer engineering at the Northern Alberta Institute of Technology and was recently voted one of its top 50 alumni since its founding. Mark also sits on various boards of direction for software development and manufacturing programs. In just under an hour today, you'll discover how barcoding can dramatically simplify physical processes and data management, saving you time and money and allowing you to keep your physical and virtual worlds in sync. We will offer a Q&A. Feel free to use the questions pane of your GoToWebinar console to enter your questions as they come along, and we'll address them at the end of Mark's presentation. Without any further delay, Mark, over to you. Oh, yeah.
Excellent. All right, well, good afternoon, everybody. We apologize for the brief time change there, or the brief notice on the time change, but looks like we have quite a few people here, and we'll get through. We won't keep you for very long. I'm losing my voice, so if you do have any questions, just use the chat to ask them. I'll do my best to answer them or speak up or whatever is required. But what we're going to do is just briefly go through and talk about, first, why you want to. What is the virtual world versus the physical world, and why do you want those in sync? And then how do you do it? And we'll give you a little bit of a software demo as well at the end to give an example of things that you can do to manage this problem. Okay, so let's start with electronic data. So everybody uses electronic data today. That's the whole reason you bought NAV. You bought NAV to manage your data. So it can be a competitive advantage, but in order for it to be competitive, you need to be able to get it in a timely manner, and it has to be accurate. If it's not, that data is going to lead you astray. It's not going to give you that competitive advantage you're hoping for. So the way you get that data in, and if we're talking about shop floor or warehouse or those sorts of things, is via the physical transaction. So, you ship something. That's a physical transaction. And generally, if you're not using some sort of data collection tool, that generates a piece of paper, right? So you mark down on a piece of paper, you ship something, or you received something. And then somebody has to go in and enter that into your NAV system. And that's where the problems start, right? As soon as you have to do that manual data entry, you've got a problem with matching up what's happening in the real world with your physical world in NAV, okay? So very often when we talk to clients, what we see is, paper gets misplaced, or it gets misplaced for a certain period of time and is only delayed. Or there's issues with retyping the information from the piece of paper into NAV. And that adds a lot of cost. People don't realize the cost of that poor data entry. It's not just redoing the data entry, but if I go in and I didn't properly record a receipt, and the system doesn't know I actually have an item in stock, I might reorder that item, and I'm doubling up my inventory. I have it listed as being in stock in NAV, and I just don't know I've shipped it, and I promised it to another customer, and I don't have it. I'm missing shipments, and my customers are getting unhappy and going elsewhere. So there's fairly significant costs with expediting, overstocking, lost sales, all of those sorts of things that can occur if your physical world doesn't match what your virtual NAV world thinks it should be. Okay, and those are the items we just talked about. And poor customer service is a big one. Your on-time delivery decreases by 10%. You're losing, roughly 1% of your market share. There was a study a few years ago that sort of showed that. So definitely an issue having your paper-based systems not matching your NAV system. So how do we deal with that? Well, we basically use barcoding, okay? So there's a lot of different approaches to collecting data. Barcoding, it's probably the most accessible. It's commodity, it's been out there for 50 years, and it's very easy, very cost-effective to get into. Other options are RFID and things like that, OCR for some types of documents like receipt documents and things like that. But generally, barcoding is going to give you your biggest bang for the buck. Okay. The best thing about it is it improves transaction accuracy. And what I mean by that, typically it's when we're dealing with inventory, but it can be labor as well, labor or inventory. And what that means is, we'll use the inventory example. When I pick something or I ship something, I'm scanning a barcode, and that verifies that that physical object is recorded as it stands on the shop floor in NAV. So I didn't grab the wrong box. I didn't pick from the wrong bin. I didn't scan the wrong sales order, those types of things. So you improve that accuracy fairly significantly. And then the big advantage of that, of course, is now I'm not doing all those things we mentioned in the last slide, which is I'm not overstocking things because, I don't think I have them. I'm not expediting things because I thought I had them, but I don't. And the pickers on the warehouse, if you have a larger warehouse, what that means is if they're told to go to a specific bin to pick that product, they'll have a very high level of confidence that it's there. So it dramatically improves your warehouse efficiency as well. In the case of labor capture on the shop floor for manufacturers and even for distributors as well, having that real-time labor feedback on production orders or jobs or assembly orders or whatever you're using is vitally important for customer service. Customer phones up, wants to know where their order is, or the production planner wants to figure out what's going to be late. Knowing exactly what's going on in real time is actually very important. And just as importantly is using that information to set your pricing. If you expect something to take 10 hours to build, because that's what guys write on their time card, and when you start recording actuals with barcode scanning, it turns out it's 14 or 15 hours. Now you know why your margins are so low. You're spending a lot more money to build a product than you expected, or you need to track rework and things like that. So that barcoding really does give you that timely and accurate information that you need to better make decisions on the data that you have in your system. Okay. Now, that's all fine and dandy, but just collecting that data often isn't enough. So most of this is about collecting data. But another thing to consider is we're collecting this data, we're bringing it into NAV, and we're turning it into information. So data really is useless. If somebody tells me I have 40 of this item in stock, that's meaningless without some context. Without understanding, oh, well, normally I stock 300, so 40 is actually quite bad. Or normally we only buy that as we need it, so 40 is really bad. So without that additional context, that data point means nothing to me. Right? So when we pull this data in from the shop floor, we combine it with other data in NAV to turn it into information, particularly on reports and business intelligence and things like that, to allow people to make decisions. Well, why do we just do that in NAV? Why not give the guys on the shop floor, if you have a decent workforce, the ability to make some of those decisions themselves? So for example, I received something. Wouldn't it be nice if the system popped up on a mobile device right then and said, you know what, this thing was expedited, it's needed on the production floor right now, or this needs to be shipped to a customer immediately. Another example, somebody goes to pick from a bin and the bin is empty. Well, what do they do now? Do they write it on a piece of paper and figure it out, the next day or later that afternoon? Or do we give them enough information to make a decision on what to do at that point, right? So beyond just barcoding for data collection, with the clients that we have available on the shop floor, in other words, the interfaces and the hardware we have available on the shop floor, we can actually provide information to the guys on the shop floor now instead of just, have them being data capture devices, right? Them having people be nothing more than a tool for capturing data. Okay, so now that we know that we all want barcoding because it's great, we have a few different options to actually implement that. So the first two there are actually available in NAV today. So ADCS is an automated data capture system that is available in NAV, and I'll talk about it more in a sec. If you're on 2013 and up, it's no cost. 2009, it's older, it's a bit of a cost. And starting with 2015, we had the tablet client, and in 2016, we have the phone client. So both of those can actually be used on the shop floor, either manufacturing or distribution, to present and collect data. Outside of NAV, if we look at add-ons, we have things like mobile WMS, where it runs on a more rugged device and is really tailored to make the process of running your warehouse more efficient. And if we're talking about manufacturing, we also have the ability to capture labor and shop floor events with a time collection module. That's what this TCM is, time collection module, independently of having to use sort of a NAV interface on the shop floor. So we can use NAV as sort of a generic tool set, if we like, or we can go to something that's purposely built to make your shop environment more efficient. And the choice of which to use depends on a few criteria. So let's look at the ADCS. Only works with warehousing. It's free in 2013 and up, as I mentioned. In 2009, it's older. It's a fairly hefty cost. You have to weigh that. But the downside is, it's not a very nice user interface. It doesn't handle serial numbers and lot numbers very well. It really doesn't do much more than picking and inventory counts, and it's very basic. But for a lot of people, that might be enough. You can turn it on in 15 minutes and start scanning barcodes if you like. Okay, so that is something that you can look at. Most people don't use this out of the box. They customize the heck out of it, or buy an add-on that's already customized the heck out of it. But it is there, and the basics do work out of the box. The next option is a tablet or a phone client. Now, those currently don't have built-in barcoding support. That might be coming, where you can actually use the camera in the device to scan a barcode. So today, you typically pair it with a device like I've got there beside, and it's about roughly that scale. Device is a little handheld device, Bluetooth device, you can scan barcodes into. But if you've used those tablet and phone clients, they're very much like what you'd expect on a tablet app or a phone app, which is great because they're intuitive, but there's a lot of swiping, there's a lot of tapping and things like that to get your work done. So they're not really the most efficient for your workforce on the shop floor, okay? You're going to find that you may even slow them down by doing something like this. However, if you have fixed stations and shipping and receiving, maybe that's a good solution, okay? So those are some of the things to think about with both the ADCS and the tablet and the phone client. Now, one step up from that is getting a third-party add-on, and there's a few out there. We produce one, of course, that you can talk to ArcherPoint about. But typically, these add-ons, what they do is they run on a rugged device, right? So they'll run on something that can get run over by a forklift or dropped onto concrete and things like that, and just keep working. And the interface is very specific to making the people on the shop floor more efficient. So for example, if I'm doing picking, I can have it as simple as I walk up and scan the item I'm picking and then move on. And it defaults in the quantity in the bins and everything else. Or if I want better accuracy, I can have the guy scan the bin, scan the item, and then specify quantity. And of course, slightly longer process, maybe 3 seconds instead of 1 second, but that gets me to my inventory accuracy. I now know that I'm picking the right product from the right bin with the appropriate quantity, okay? But back to my original point, you can tailor that interface, tailor that workflow to a graphical tool to make it meet your needs, your process needs in the warehouse. And it keeps you very efficient. So the guys are very quick at using these types of dedicated scanners and dedicated software. Okay. They also do a lot more than standard nav, such as advanced inventory count. So if you have a lot of inventory in your warehouse, you know, you need base nav inventory count probably isn't cutting it for you. You're probably already using Excel or Access or some other tool to help you with your inventory counts. You need to get rid of that and go with you know, an advanced inventory count module that's going to do that for you, right? So again, they add more to what standard nav offers. So it's not just data collection, they add additional functionalities and a better interface for the shop floor. All right. When we're talking about shop floor data collection, typically we use this term when we're talking about production facilities, right? So not necessarily warehouse, but more production. However, it can be used in warehouse. And the idea behind this is we really have two distinct types of information we want to capture in an environment. One is material-oriented, typically picking, shipping, receiving, things like that, QC, that type of stuff. And the other is more labor-oriented. So if you have, and normally people in the warehouse don't want to track labor, though we can. But in a production environment, we want to track how long people spent on a production order or doing asset maintenance, or how long they spent on a job, or non-productive time, or how much time they spent on rework within the facility. And we want that to be, again, efficient and accurate. So we use a barcoded traveler that they can scan and record their time. The other thing we can do is actually capture time and attendance, which now feeds into payroll. So from the time the guys scan their barcode in the morning until they get their pay stub, nobody's doing any data entry whatsoever. So you get to a point where you can have, you know, 400 or 500 employees managed by a single payroll person, right? So it really dramatically improves your efficiency and, again, the accuracy of the information that's coming in. Right? So now what's happening in the real world in your shop floor is mimicked in real time for the most part within your virtual environment in NAV. Okay. And if you could see me, I'm waving my arms and doing all sorts of crazy stuff. Normally I'd be asking for questions as we go. If you do have questions, just put them in the chat window and we'll get to them after. Just a little bit more on this. I'll do a couple slides of case studies here to give you an idea of the return on investment you expect from these types of implementations. So here's an example where we had an environment with several thousand items. You know, it was about 10 or 12,000. Very, you know, fair amount of inventory on hand. It used to take them roughly a couple of weeks to do their inventory, from pre-counts, from preparing everything to doing the pre-counts to doing the data entry, a lot of Excel reconciliation, things like that, to getting the final count, right? So that's typical for a lot of people. You know, we had another client recently, same thing. Before we got in there, 5 days with 16 people to do their inventory count. In that example, they dropped down to a single day to do their inventory count. So they saved 4 days times 16 people just by going to a better, you know, barcoded counting solution. In this particular case study, what we did was we implemented, you know, the advanced count and the barcode scanning, and put all of that in. They started doing cycle counts, but the first full physical inventory count went from 2 weeks to about 4 to 5 days. Okay, so really the system paid for itself the first time they used it, and we see that a lot. You know, the other guys I just mentioned, it was, again, fairly recent. You know, the first time they use the system, it pays for itself. It's strictly on the inventory count, not including any of those other things that you have to deal with, you know, like inventory accuracy and pick efficiency and better receiving and shipping processes, right? So very easy to quantify the results you're going to get when you use this system. So that's sort of an inventory barcoding case study. Another one, from a manufacturing point of view, we're going to go in and, you know, they did a lot of manual time cards. So you can read all this. Really, they had a lot of data entry, because they had all these manual time cards coming in that they had to date enter, and they had to re-enter for payroll and all of that kind of stuff. Well, of course, we went in there, we put in, and again, talk to your ArcherPoint rep for information on this. They can give you an ROI calculator. It'll help you decide if this makes sense for you. But what it does is it allows you to actually scan a barcode to start tracking time. And then you can still manually enter time, or you can clock on, clock off, that type of thing. And so we put a system like this in, and the results are, basically the two people that were doing full-time data entry are now doing something else, really is what it amounted to. And they went down to one payroll person for several hundred employees, right? So just on that alone, they pay for the entire system company-wide in about 6 months, not including all the ancillary benefits like better visibility into what's happening on the shop floor, better visibility into root causes of rework, all of those sorts of things that were now possible. Okay, so those are the types of things you can expect to see if your information coming from the shop floor is more automated and more accurate. All right. Again, I would normally jump in and say any questions, but if you have them, we'll cover them at the end. What I'm going to do is jump in and give you a quick demo of a couple of pieces of software here. And we're going to keep it a little shorter today, but again, we'll leave a lot of time at the end for questions. All right, so let me just clear this out here. So what you see on the screen right now, I'm just going to come up here. This is actually a physical device sitting on my desk. And so what happens is I can actually, I can use the mouse to control it, but, this is the style of device that would be typically advocating in a warehouse environment. A lot of people ask us about phones and tablets. Typically they're not going to cut it. They're not ergonomic. They're not rugged enough for that environment. The people that do use them typically use the solution for their outside sales guys or vendor managed inventory, that type of thing for the phones. Okay, but basically what this allows me to do is, the user can come in and can tap the screen, and I'll go into Pix, and typically what he'll do is he'll scan a barcode. So you might not want to get away from the paper in the system. You might want to use that as a trigger, a physical trigger to say, hey, warehouse guy, here's some work for you to do. He'll pick it up, he'll scan it, and that loads up the pick on the dedicated device. Or if you want to go paperless, I can tap this lookup and find the pick document that I need to execute, and I can have it auto-assigned to me and things like that when I grab it. So I grab that pick document, and it brings it up, and it shows me everything that I'm supposed to do on that particular document. Now, the nice thing about a solution like this, again, is it makes it very efficient for the guys doing the scanning. So it shows me, and back to that decision support, more than just making it efficient for scanning, it gives me some context about what I'm supposed to do on the shop floor. So for example here, it shows me everything I need to actually pick. I don't see one line at a time. Though there is a mode that if you want to enable it, that I only see one line at a time, you can do that. But the advantage of this is, let's say I'm actually standing here at this bin, W414, and that's actually where I want to start picking. So I could go in there and scan that bin barcode and just start picking from there. So you'll notice that if I scan that barcode, it automatically selects the first line with that particular bin on it. Okay, so I don't have to choose an edit box, swipe the screen, tap somewhere. I scan a barcode, the system reacts. I don't even have to look at the screen. I scan the bin barcode, and then I scan the item barcode and optionally enter quantity. So in this case, what I've got, again, for helping the guys on the shop floor, you saw a picture of that item pop up for a couple of seconds. We can enable that visual verification. So if you do have a temporary workforce or something like that, by doing that, when they scan the barcode, they can visually verify that what they're holding in their hand matches what they scanned, so that you're again improving your inventory accuracy. Now for the quantity entry, this is entirely optional. We could allow them to specify quantity here. We could default in the quantity from the pick line. we could just have the quantity come in as 1. So if you need to pick 5, you scan 5 times. Any of that is possible through simple configuration, right? So in this case, it's asking for the quantity, so I'm going to enter 1, and just tap enter, and basically I've done my pick. Okay, so I've taken 1. I've got 9 left to pick. And again, back to a little bit of that decision support. Let's say there was only 1 in that particular bin. What do I do? Well, a few things. One, I could go in and I could add a note to this that notifies the warehouse supervisor that there's an issue. So if I do that, I can say something like, bin empty 04-14, and send that note off to my supervisor. When they come into NAV, and in the role center, we could optionally email or whatever. This is the one I just entered here. You can see I've done this demo once before. You come in, you can click on it, and they actually go to that document and know exactly what's going on. So without the person in the warehouse moving a step, they've started this process for inventory cleanup. Okay? Then, okay, sure, he's notified the supervisor. What does he do next? Well, next, I've got it set up for F8 on this keyboard, but to illustrate, I'll tap the screen, and I can hit item inquiry. And what that allows me to do is it allows me to drill down and actually see where else I might be able to pick this particular item from. So yes, I can pick it in the current bin, but I can go over to this bin potentially and pick it from there instead. So I can come in and change the bin and override what NAV has told me, assuming I have the appropriate permissions. So that's a little bit on the warehouse side. I use picking as an example, but the same principle applies, really everywhere in the system. Some additional functionality we have on receiving, or again, anywhere in the system, because you can customize your workflows and your menus from within NAV. So I can come into NAV and add whatever business logic I want into this application. But receiving by default allows me to actually take a picture of product as it's coming in. So for example, I receive something, it's a damaged box. The receiver right there on the dock can take a picture of that. It gets attached to the NAV based on the rules you specify. The purchaser gets alerted, optionally if you want. And right there, without taking a step, you start an RMA process back to the vendor, because the purchaser has a picture of the issue, it's linked to the purchase order, and they can start working on getting things resolved immediately. I could also record a voice note as well, along with that if I like. Okay, so lots of potential for that. For QC in general, we have a lot of people using it for shipping. They take a picture of what's going out the door, so that they have proof that when it left, it was in good shape. Right? So lots of options for that picture capability in the system. Okay. Now we'll talk about inventory count, because inventory count time is coming up for a lot of people at the end of the year, and I just went through and ranted about how you need a better inventory count solution than probably what you're using. So if you're doing barcoded inventory counts, you can also do these paper-based, but of course you're going to get the value if you do barcoded. I can come in here, and the way it works is I create count sheets, typically one count sheet per count team that I have out on the shop floor. So for each handheld, typically you have a count sheet. So I can go into one of these sheets. I'll just grab team 3, and what it does is it opens up and it starts out blank. Okay, so in this particular case, I haven't scanned anything yet. Okay, so I haven't. I've been told, you take your handheld, you go down shelf 1, and you scan everything you find. Okay, this is for a full physical count. For a cycle count, it would actually list all the items and bins that I need to verify. Okay, that's a blind count. So on this particular case, it's a full count. I'd actually come in and I'd scan the bin. Okay, so once I scan the bin, it comes up here, tells me what bin I scanned. And we can have it, remember the bin you scanned or forget it. We can also subdivide bins. So if you have a big receiving bin, we can subdivide that into multiple sections without having to change any of your configuration in there, that type of thing. But at any rate, the inventory count process, I scan my bin, I scan my item. Again, we can have it show a picture if you really want, or you turn that off. I enter the quantity I've counted, and I move on to my next bin and my next item. And I go all the way through, and that's how I count inventory. And that's how you get from 5 days of counting to 1 day of counting. And then within NAV, you can come in there and you can go into the inventory account area, and this is where you come in and you do your reconciliations. So there's a difference analysis you can run. You can get all that detail and compare what they've scanned in the real world, in the physical world, and compare it with what's recorded in NAV in your virtual world. So again, the inventory account is a very stark example of that virtual and physical worlds, being out of sync. You run an analysis that tells you how much they're out of sync. You do your audited recounts from within here, so you can generate recount sheets, all of that kind of stuff, and you sync up your physical and your virtual worlds so that next time somebody does a pick, you can have a high degree of confidence that what you've been told to pick is actually where it's supposed to be. Okay, so that's a little bit on the warehousing side. Now, to switch over to a little bit of the manufacturing side. Oh, and on this, I sort of keep them separated and isolated, but there is a lot of crossover. So when we're doing warehouse activities, we might feed that into production. So I can actually use mobile devices like this to do consumption, to do output, those types of things. Okay. Similarly, when we get into the time collection or the shop floor data collection, I don't have to just collect time. I can collect material requirements as well. So I can do output, I can do consumption, quality capture, all those sorts of things as well. So there's overlap between the two, sort of tools that you're using for barcoding. Okay. In this particular case, what this allows me to do is it allows me to scan a badge, and I just plugged in my scanner here. It allows me to scan a badge to clock an employee in. Okay, so to basically unlock the terminal. And it tells me exactly when I scanned in for the day. Okay, so that's my time and attendance portion. So I can use that to go to payroll to again eliminate that manual entry aspect of it. So I've got more accurate information. So once I've unlocked the terminal, the next step for somebody is to actually indicate what activity they're performing. So at this point, somebody could come up behind them, scan their badge and clock in for the day, that sort of thing. But let's say I walked up, I scan my badge, and I'm going to start some work. I scan a barcode on the traveler, and it immediately brings up everything I'm supposed to do for that particular activity. So it gives me work instructions, gives me a bill of material, allows me to do output for it, and allows me to see any linked documents from within that. So if I have assembly diagrams or jig setup or customer-specific things, I can click on any of these and launch that on the shop floor. This is, again, giving your guys on the shop floor the information they need to make the appropriate decisions. And then also quality measures, right? So the nice thing about this is I can capture this rather than on a piece of paper. I can have a QC guy walking around with a tablet, running this. It just runs in a browser, and actually capturing that quality information, in real time. It gets fed into NAV, and I've got all of that information there, right? I don't have a separate system that I'm managing. I don't have to do duplicate entry, manual entry, or anything like that. Okay. So this is basically how it works. I just entered an hour. We can clock in, clock out to calculate the time, but I've only been on there for a few seconds. A couple of other things. It's not just for production personnel. If you have maintenance people that are doing asset maintenance, we can track that time. I mentioned we can track non-productive time, first aid, rework, whatever activities that are occurring on the shop floor, you can track via a barcode. Okay. Back in the PowerPoint presentation, I mentioned there's potentially some other options besides barcoding, and one of them is a tablet, right, a touchscreen interface. So let's say you wanted to use a solution like this without using barcoding. Well, it's not quite as nice because you do potentially have to type things in. So for example, if I'm on a tablet and I don't have a Bluetooth barcode scanner associated with it, I could come in here and enter my user ID and clock in that way, and of course I entered it incorrectly. So that's an immediate example of why barcoding is better, because if I'd scanned the barcode, it would have been accurate. So I can do that, and if I'm running a touch screen, what I can do is I'm just going to clock in as somebody else here. Instead of showing my time card by default, it can show me a dispatch list, and the dispatch list shows me all the work that's either assigned to me directly, so say I'm clocked in as this Kelly person. Here's the work assigned to that person. That's independent of work centers and machine centers. Or I can choose one of the options up here on the touch screen, just tap that, clock on, and again, in real time, I've now sent that information to NAV without using barcoding in this case, but it's the same basic idea, right? I've now got my physical world, what's going on in real time happening on my shop floor, tied into what NAV thinks should be going on, okay? So again, we get that accurate feedback loop from the shop to NAV. All right. Now, this gives us a fair amount of time for questions. I'm going to stop here rather than jump in and go through, more of what you would see in NAV around, approvals and, all the different things you can do with the warehouse side. Really, this gives you a general idea of how we can capture data in the shop, in the warehouse, feed it into NAV. If you want more detail, just contact your ArcherPoint rep or info@archerpoint.com, and we can set up something that's more tailored, for you, and help you out that way. Okay. So with that, I'll actually open it up to any questions that you might have.
Hey, thanks so much, Mark. And again, if you do have any questions, feel free to type them into the questions pane of your GoToWebinar console, or just use the raise your hand feature, which is should be next to your name. Don't have any questions at this moment. We'll give just a moment to compile those.
And to fill the gap, one thing I do get asked about a lot is what type of hardware are you looking at? Well, there's the ruggedized devices, and those are generally the best fit for your warehouse. And they started around $1,300. Phones like consumer phones for your outside sales guys, you roughly know what the costs are. These fixed terminals, tablets or fixed terminals for production, there's really a lot of options like thin clients or Chrome boxes that are really around $100 or $150 for the terminals on the shop floor. And there's a million brands out there, Honeywell, Data Logic, which is the example I used, a number of things like that.
And lots of options. We don't have any questions at this time, so I just want to take a moment to thank everybody for taking time out of their day to attend. We hope you consider it time well spent. To help us to continue to offer value, we'd like to ask you to take just a minute or two more to give us your feedback and make any suggestions you'd have for future Lunch and Learn topics. You can also submit your questions to info@archerpoint.com. That's info@archerpoint.com, or contact your ArcherPoint representative for those clients out there on the call today. Mark, once again, thanks for a great presentation. Safe travels. And this concludes today's session, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.